It's Sunday, October 20, 2024. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. Our guest today is the co-founder of Partners for Justice, which provides collaborative support services to people facing criminal charges. She's a public defender who believes that everyone is entitled to not just equal justice, but to equal mercy. Emily Galvin Almanza, welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
So I get a little nervous when I do the countdown of how many days to the election because, you know, it's not far off. 16 days between now and voting day. And that is, the news of this is ricocheting not just around the United States, but right around the world because of the effect of Donald Trump's presidency if he was to win. And I know that the German chancellor was meeting with Joe Biden the other day and was basically going, we're very worried about this. It seems to me that actually there are world leaders and NATO countries and the like who actually understand the threat, the rise of fascism, far more than many Americans do. Do you think that's fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. Sometimes in my conversations with friends here in the U.S., I'm struck by how folks on the conservative side just don't see any authoritarian threat coming off of Donald Trump. And I think in part it's because during his first term in office, there were a lot of people within his administration who didn't cross lines when he asked them to cross lines. And I think one of the goals of a second term in office for Donald Trump would be to cross those lines without resistance. And so when we look for why world leaders are so concerned about what Donald Trump as president means for the safety of other parts of the world, we have to think about his constant praise of dictators, his constant praise of other world leaders who have instituted totalitarian regimes, whom he admires, whom he openly speaks about admiring. We have to think about the offhand remarks about, unleashing police to just be really violent for one day. We have to think about his desire to he mentioned going after the political left and specifically Adam Schiff the other day. So I feel like people overseas who have lived under totalitarian rule in particular they're picking up what he's putting down in a way that people here who've had the luxury of decades of a democracy might not be picking up.
The quote from Thursday or Friday, I think, was Trump saying that Americans who don't support him are the enemy and are a bigger problem than China and Russia. He said, these are bad people, these are sick people. I mean, this is despotism. And yet people, certainly Republicans, MAGA Republicans, and even lawmakers, they brush it off as he's just being Trump or he's just being sarcastic. He's not really capable of sarcasm or even jokes for that matter. I mean, we have to trust what he says, right?
Well, I think that's the burden of running for office. The manner in which he speaks. I've spent a lot of time watching his quotes in context because I do feel like oftentimes we pull a quote out of context and maybe on the page it looks different than the way it was said with all the tone and context of the surrounding ideas. His manner of presentation is very casual. So everything he says in a way that is almost intimate with the crowd and almost offhand and very improvisational, sometimes a little wandery. But that can't take away from the fact that as a candidate for one of the most important political offices in the world, he doesn't get freebies. He doesn't get offhand remarks. Nobody who is in that position. I wouldn't give, Vice President Harris the luxury of too many offhand remarks either. I take her very seriously when she says something. And I think we have to hold both of them quite accountable. If we're going to hold people accountable to the standard that we want from a potential leader of the free world, we cannot allow the constant wandering into terrifying subject matter and terrifying ideas to be written off as jokes or just campaign palaver.
And you're quite right to say that this time around the guardrails aren't there. We don't have a Mark Milley, for example, who's going to protect us from a third world war because he's having to talk, through back channels to China and say it's okay, Trump's just being Trump. And the problem is that Trump knows this now. He knows that there are these people that he considers to be moles in his in his administration. And so they're talking about putting together a loyal administration, not just in the White House, but also through Project 2025 in the administrative state as well. That, for me, is the most dangerous part of this, that there will literally be nobody to stop him and his impulses. And he keeps talking about having absolute power and how executive order is, like, he doesn't need Congress and all that kind of stuff. I mean, how many warnings do the public need before they're like, I don't think this guy's good for the country?
I worry that people don't heed warnings until they feel the impact of things personally.
Right.
I worry a lot because I've had conversations with people, for example, who are on the conservative side, but who care very deeply about conserving the environment. They have an environmental conservatism, which I can appreciate, and have written off Project 2025 as someone else's ideas unrelated to Trump. And you can come back and say, hey, actually, Project 2025 was written by a whole bunch of former Trump officials, and that Trump has been very closely associated with the people behind this document. And also that his attitude towards the administrative state, towards, entities like the EPA has been dismissive, to say the least. I mean, really, really, he would like to dismantle a lot of the entities that preserve our environment, to use that example. I worry that for people who have already decided to support him, they are all too ready to just find any excuse to separate him from the terrible reality that he does, in fact, stand for some really bad things, like abandoning efforts to make our energy economy more sustainable, like going back to a world in which we're completely reliant on fossil fuels, pollution, be damned. And also more terrifying things like in Project 2025, essentially turning the Department of Health and Human Services into the abortion police. I mean, there are all sorts of things in that document that should give any American pause, particularly with the fact that the Supreme Court is poised to let a Trump presidency run completely amok. We no longer have some of the judicial guardrails that we thought we had previously. And so combining an executive who wants totalitarian power and who has very sweeping ideas of how to sort of abrogate individual rights in service of his unhinged vision, and a court that's not going to stop him, and an administrative state that legally just doesn't have the same grip it had before. And just to remind people, when we think of sort of administrative law and the entities, the agencies that we're talking about, this is the seat of experts. The people who work at something like the EPA or the Department of Health and Human Services are career experts who specialize in a particular field that the president couldn't possibly be expected to know about. So by sweeping them aside and undermining their authority and firing people who aren't loyal, we're also losing our national treasure chest of expertise.
And you're also describing the Chevron case there as well. And maybe for people who don't quite understand, because it is complex, the Chevron case does do away with expertise. And it basically puts the decisions on quite technical things in the hands of political lawmakers.
In the hands of Congress. Yeah, it's a huge problem because I think about it this way. I'm a trial lawyer. There is a lot I don't know about. I mean, I love watching Dr. House. But if I have a case with serious medical issues and I'm going to have to cross-examine a doctor about a set of medical records, you better believe I'm going to go talk to a doctor on my own and find out what those medical records mean and how to interpret something like pneumothorax. We need that in government. People don't get elected to Congress because they know everything that they could ever have to know in the world. Ideally, they get elected to Congress because they have good judgment and the ability to tap into the right people's knowledge at the right time. If we lose those right people, if we lose our experts, we essentially have a government of ideologues and people who are really good at getting attention, but nobody who actually knows how any of this works.
So we have to ask, why did the Supreme Court strike down Chevron? What is at play here?
I often think of things in terms of the conservative agenda. I'm not sure I'm the right person to ask. You should maybe ask someone who's trying to execute the conservative agenda, not their agenda. But it's really interesting to me to think about because for me, you can probably tell that I'm quite on the progressive side. But I believe deeply in individual liberties. I believe deeply in individual rights. I don't want the government in my life. I don't want the government in my body. I don't want the government telling me what to think, what to do, how to raise my kids. And I find a lot of common ground with people of different political ideologies because of that desire to live a life free of government control and intrusion. It's how we interpret control and intrusion that differs. A lot of the agencies whose power was undermined by the Chevron decision are executing forms of power that control companies, profit-driven companies. So, for example, the EPA can regulate companies and prevent pollution. The reason we have clean water and clean air in many cases is because the EPA is protecting our environment so that my daughter can drink from the tap and not die. Or the Department of Health and Human Services, or any of these, I know there's very mixed feelings in the Department of Education, but minimum standards that like kids should be able to read when they graduate high school. I mean, these are things that these agencies ensure, not just for jurisdictions that are lucky enough to have a great set of nonprofits or churches that, help the community along, but for everywhere equally. Everyone gets the benefit of the expertise and services of these agencies. If you are a company that would like to not be regulated, if you're a company that would like to make as much money as you possibly can, hand over fist and have nothing getting in your way, these agencies are a problem. And so for a Supreme Court that has been very, very inclined towards the conservative side and conservative thinking, perhaps because so many of their members emerged from the Federalist Society, they're going to agree to strip that regulatory power and weaken it down. I would also note that a lot of their decisions consolidate power in the court, because when you don't have power in the hands of another clear authority like a regulator, like an agency, like Congress, these questions will continue coming to the court, and the court can continue cherry picking issues they like, issues they don't like, and handing out power as they see fit.
It's very interesting to me that in the US, there is a rhetoric that deregulation is good. And from where I'm from in Europe, and you probably know the European Union, their Bible for regulation is like this. It's all about protections and safety. And, even what you call clean water here is not going to meet the standards of European water. It just isn't.
Yeah.
I think
I admit that I use cosmetics that are approved by the EU because I don't necessarily
right. And we know this, and we've even seen it in simple things like you look at the ingredients of Heinz tomato ketchup in the US and look at the same product in Europe, and there's double the number of ingredients in the American one, which is just full of preservatives and the types of things you do not want your children ingesting. So why is it that there is this, it's almost like a kind of libertarian view of regulation, where people, maybe, is it because it's boring? I mean, is that what this boils down to? That actually it's not a sexy subject, and people will be like, Donald Trump presents this as I got rid of this and I deregulated that and I did this, and it's like you're literally killing people in the process.
It's really hard for people to track problems where the results of those problems are indirect or latent. And by which I mean, we eat that ketchup that has 40 times more ingredients than it actually needs and is probably more of a food product than an actual food, like an edible thing. It's
an industrially produced edible substance.
Exactly, yes. And down the road, we may get sick, and we may have high blood pressure or diabetes or obesity or cancer, any number of health problems that are really, really common in this country. And we can't, unequivocally connect it to the ketchup we ate. This is the mystery of, anytime someone comes down with a grave health condition, they may ask themselves, how did this happen? What was I exposed to? What habit in my life brought this about? And when we are sort of in a miasma of unhealth, it's really hard for us to trace cause and effect in this country. I think that a lot of our agencies sort of labor under much more, as you point out, a more difficult political environment than in Europe, where people connect regulation to safety, as in my government is going to make sure that I'm not ingesting substances that can cause all of these conditions. I think there's a lot of mistrust of authority in the US. I think there's a lot more and more mistrust of expertise. I do get it, because bureaucracy and expertise can mix really, really badly. Bureaucracy can be designed to make agencies move slowly and carefully, and being careful is a good thing. But sometimes when you're on the outside looking in, it can look like an agency is putting up rules that make no sense, that are just getting in the way of solving a problem. And people on all sides of the political spectrum can criticize these agency decisions and processes and question whether we're really being kept safe. For example, looking at our ketchup bottle. So I do think that there is there are reasons why Americans do not have the same enthusiasm for those agencies, both educational reasons and also, a history of high levels of bureaucracy that can diminish our ability to understand positive impact.
We could present it in a much simpler way, which I've actually seen people talk about, and that is that if you eat the same diet in Europe, you don't get fat, whereas you eat the same diet here, and it just the way your body processes it is so different. And I found that to be maybe the simplest and most interesting way of looking at this. Is that the inflammation and all of the issues associated with that, which is very difficult to live with, is often caused by these industrially produced edible substances.
And you're hitting on the very crux of it, right? Like if you go to a U.S. grocery store, you've got all sorts of articles telling you don't eat the processed food. And so I'm in the grocery store and I'm thinking, okay, I shouldn't eat 90% of the things in here. And they're like, stay to the edges of the grocery store. Only eat the vegetables and meats and fruits. Okay, so we shouldn't have grocery stores where you're not supposed to eat a lot of the stuff that's in there. And the fact that we do, is why a lot of Americans, I think, don't have the same reaction to regulatory agencies that a European might, because I don't think they've proven the same level of care. I think that is very mixed in with the pressure of capitalism in our economy, with the pressure of the amount of authority. I mean, we could link this back in many ways to Citizens United and to corporate interests having a larger political voice in our country, which can enable them to put pressure on political actors that ultimately reduces the amount of weight the government is willing to bring down to restrain things like bad mass-produced food that makes us sick, but is very profitable.
And then we should probably mention the food deserts, places like Appalachia, where the only food you can get is processed food in a local supermarket, and there is nowhere for miles that sells fresh vegetables. I mean, that is contributing to the health crisis, and yet a lot of those people are voting for Donald Trump.
This is indeed the case. I think a lot. I'm hesitating here because I'm thinking a lot about how we treat our farmers and how we support farmers, and how you can make a living. I mean, when you have mass producers of farm products, specifically seeds and other, things that farmers need to grow food, that can be modified in order to need to be repurchased instead of replanted. When you don't have regulations that protect the ability of small family farms to sustain themselves, when you have a market set up where middlemen can take so much of the proceeds from the sale of food, whether it's beef cattle or corn, we're also building economies that aren't necessarily as supportive of local food creation as they could be.
Yeah, so much of the fruit and veg is being shipped out of these food deserts. So the food is growing there, but it's just not getting to the local communities.
I was talking to a candidate for office in a very conservative jurisdiction probably about a year ago. And, he's born and raised there. And he was telling me about his campaign. It's really difficult for a Democrat to run in this deep red jurisdiction where he was running. And what he'd been out doing, there had been some sort of climate event where people needed water, and he was bringing bottled water around to people in need. And he was bringing bottled water to people with big old Trump signs in their yard and going up and introducing himself and talking about what he believed in. And a lot of what he believed in, and this is something that I think we don't talk about enough, a lot of what he believed in, the policies he wanted to bring, were things that these Trump constituents very much wanted. The same way when I talk to conservative friends, we often want very similar things like massive investments in children and families to make it easier for parents to afford having kids and giving those kids a great education. And when he was talking to these constituents, he would talk with them about why they were supporting Trump, and he would try to point out that the policies he offered were closer to what they actually wanted than the policies that Trump had to offer. And he also pointed out that he was the one bringing them water. He was the one showing up. Now, that was not enough for him to overcome the political makeup of his state. And I think that's one huge challenge we have, is that actual policy and the ability to perceive one another as human is having a very hard time overcoming political branding right now.
So this is a theme of people voting for the wrong candidate because of the propaganda. And this is massive. I mean, this is really the biggest issue for this election as I see it, because what we've been talking about, plugging these gaps, is what the Democrats offer, and is what Kamala Harris offers. They're actually talking about it. Makes up part of the policy. It doesn't appear on Donald Trump's policy. He's continuing to gut the EPA given the chance. The repealing of the Paris Climate Accord again for a second time. So I call it turkeys voting for Thanksgiving. And this is happening a lot, right? It's people who will not benefit from Donald Trump's policies. He never gave them a tax cut in the first place. I mean, he tricked them. He uses the trickle-down economics concept, or fallacy, I should call it, to make people think that they're going to benefit. But he never gave regular people a tax cut. And so the Democrats have a much better tax policy for regular working people, and yet they just can't resist the orange guy who, because he puts some music on and sways for 39 minutes at the end of a town hall, it makes him more connective. I mean, it's such a shame, because we're literally watching America sleepwalk into authoritarianism, and it's completely unnecessary.
I think his branding works in a few different ways. For one thing, there's the latency of the state of an economy. So, for example, Trump inherited the economy of Obama.
Right.
And had 4 years to dismantle that. And then Joe Biden inherited a pandemic and the economy of Donald Trump. And I think it's astonishing that we're not under worse circumstances now. The fact that we are able to all, stay home for years and offer massive, massive payouts to companies that were under stress. And obviously there was a lot of fraud in that process, and to individuals, and make it through the pandemic without a full economic crash is amazing. Trump holds himself out as a successful businessman. Now, anybody who's read the stories of anybody who's ever worked with him knows that he's not, in fact. He's the
he
guy
played one on TV.
He played one on TV, and he doesn't pay his bills. But he holds himself out as a strong man, as a great businessman, as someone who can do business for us, and as someone who will intimidate other world leaders into not posing a threat to our national security, so that he no longer has to pay for foreign wars and can do whatever he says he's going to do with money back home. What's hard is that obviously none of that is true. World leaders do not find Donald Trump to be intimidating. I think those who are adverse to us see him as a bit of a patsy and someone who's easily motivated by flattery. I think that those who are not adverse to us see him as a terrifying prospect in terms of the relationships he could sever and the promises he could break, the international accords he could pull us out of. But back here at home, we have this massive marketing problem in that people don't see Obama's economy when they look at Donald Trump's presidency. They think it's Trump's economy. And they don't see Trump's economy when they look at the early years of the Biden presidency. They think it's all instantaneous. And it's getting people to understand the timescales here is massively important.
It's 2 years, pretty much. I mean, that's how long it takes for things to catch up. And Obama made this point in the speeches he's been doing in the last week or two, where he's saying, Donald Trump's economy was started as a great economy because that was my economy. Mm-hmm. But is that message getting through to the people who the diehard Trump supporters who wear the merchandise? There's no saving those people. But there are plenty of independent voters, undecided voters, fiscal conservatives, traditional conservatives, who maybe respect the institutions of America, including the Constitution, I might add, more than the orange guy. And will therefore kind of make, on this one occasion, because this is a special election, as I call it, you got to vote really for the continuation of the United States rather than crashing it.
Yes, and I feel like voters, especially young voters, have been told that a lot of times in their life, and they're really tired of being told, like, vote now or it's all over for you.
Yeah.
They want something to vote for instead of something to vote against. I think they have a lot to vote for here. I was just looking at the statistics on the rates at which young people vote, and I'm excited by the potential political power Gen Z and the millennials like me can hold if we turn out in huge numbers. If we turn out in huge numbers, we become the most powerful voting bloc in the country. and hold the ability to dictate policy at a much greater level than we've been able to previously. I think that with the Harris presidency, we stand a chance to see real investments in a green economy, real investments. She's made, as much as I'm a public defender. I got stuff about her prosecutorial background, but I do appreciate how much she has had a lifelong interest in children and families and wanting to invest in making sure that there is an economy in which we can all live our lives, have great jobs, maybe buy a house, have kids. I mean, I think there's a lot of fantastic economic ideas that she stands for, which young people who want to have a job, buy a house, live a life, with the same economic security of their parents and, God, maybe even of their grandparents. I think there's a lot to vote for here. So I hope we aren't just continually talking about the end of democracy because, the stakes couldn't be higher. And at the same time, the opportunity couldn't be greater either.
She's definitely the right candidate in the moment. I believe that. And the service that Joe Biden did by stepping aside for her was, as late as it came, it was a stroke of genius, really, because no one in history has ever had to pull a campaign together this quickly ahead of the election. But the good thing about that is it does rally support very fast, and she's raised over $1 billion, more than any candidate in history. And I often think, as much as the polls, which are still neck and neck, as much as the polls lie to us, fundraising doesn't lie. And she's outraised Donald Trump fourfold. And so this is a good sign for democracy. But are the Democrats making enough noise? Because Donald Trump's support and success is all about volume. It's not really, I don't personally believe he's as popular as he tells us he is.
Oh, no.
But we're hearing a lot of support for Kamala Harris, and it's tangible. And that's a big difference.
I agree. I hope you're right about fundraising. I hope you're right about the dollars being the votes. Certainly they are in other contexts within our political world. I wonder how many quiet Harris voters there are. That's something I think about a lot. Obviously, as a woman, as a mother of a daughter, I think a lot about my bodily integrity and my health care. And the rights of all of us who are in one way or another not white men in America. And I think that I hope that there may be many voters who may even be out there wearing MAGA hats and gold sneakers and going to rallies with their partner who may be very invested in a Trump campaign, who may still quietly enter that voting space.
Yes.
And mark the box for Harris.
Without telling anybody.
Without telling anybody.
Yeah.
Because I do think that, there's a lot of human rights on the ballot. Whether it's, that you want to retain control over your own bodily integrity and medical care, whether you want to make the hardest medical decisions you have to make on your own without the government telling you what you do or, can or cannot do, or whether it's that you don't want children bullied for their choice of bathroom or identity, or whether it's that you don't want Charlotte's Web to be banned in your local school because someone said it was satanic. I mean, there are all kinds of reasons why I think, particularly, I hope women and mothers will understand how radically too far the MAGA side has gone on a lot of issues that are sort of core to our families and ourselves.
I would agree with that. I do believe that there is. I mean, I want to talk about the female vote a little bit later, and women's healthcare connected to that. But we have to take a quick break. But I want to come back and do immigration first, because there's some very interesting stats out on that today too. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. I'm excited to tell you about Moink. That's Moo plus Oink. Moink is a meat subscription box company on a mission to fight for the family farm. They're located in rural America, run by an 8th-generation female farmer. Their animals are raised humanely, their employees are paid a living wage, and the quality of their product is better than anything you'll find in a store. Moink delivers grass-fed and grass-finished beef and lamb, pastured pork and chicken, and sustainable wild-caught Alaskan salmon straight to your door. Moink farmers farm like our grandparents did, and as a result, Moink meat tastes like it should, because the family farm does it better, and the Moink difference is a difference you can taste. Unlike the supermarket, Moink gives you total control over the quality and source of your food. You can choose the meat delivered in every box, like ribeyes to chicken breasts, pork chops to salmon fillets, and much more. Plus, you can cancel any time. Moink is helping to save rural America. Join the Moink movement today. Keep American farming going by signing up at moinkbox.com/weekend right now. And listeners to this show get free hot rolls in your first box. The best hot rolls you'll ever taste, but for a limited time. Spelt MOINK box.com/weekend. That's moinkbox.com/weekend. There's a lot happening these days. It can feel especially stressful or even hopeless when things are outside of your control. But Calm can help you restore your sense of balance and peace amidst outside chaos. Maybe you've had difficulty focusing, things like parenting pressures or work challenges or school commitments or just a personal drama that can wreak havoc on your ability to stay focused and productive. If you're dealing with a lot of stress, these feelings don't just disappear at bedtime. Trouble falling asleep, waking up in the middle of the night, not feeling rested in the morning, these are all signs that your bedtime routine could use an upgrade. Calm can help you learn to de-stress and fall asleep faster so you can get a restful night every sleep. Calm is the #1 app for sleep and meditation, giving you the power to calm your mind and change your life. Meditations to help you work through anxiety and stress, to boost your focus, build healthier habits, and take better care of your physical well-being. Sleep stories, sleep meditations, calming music that will help you drift off to a restful sleep quickly and naturally. Stress less, sleep more, and live better with Calm. For listeners of our show, Calm is offering an exclusive offer, 40% off a Calm premium subscription at calm.com/weekend. Go to calm.com/weekend for 40% off unlimited access to Calm's entire library. That's calm.com/weekend. We're back on The Weekend Show with Emily Galvin Almanza. I'm Anthony Davis. The support for Donald Trump is rising among Latinos, according to the latest polling. Latinos account for around 15% of voters across the U.S. So a recent Siena poll for the New York Times showed that nearly 1 in 10 Hispanic voters, people with roots in Spanish-speaking countries who backed Biden in 2020, will actually vote for Donald Trump this time around. Support for Democratic presidential candidates among Hispanic and Latino voters has been sliding for years. Barack Obama won around 70% of their votes. Polls give Harris just 56% support. What surprises me about this, Emily, is that Donald Trump's abusive language surrounding immigration has only ramped up in recent weeks and months. It's not just they're bringing drugs, they're rapists, that they're taking your jobs. But he now talks about poisoning the blood of the country. He refers to them like they're animals and vermin. And the word swarm and these types of things that are really completely inappropriate to, reference other humans. As well as the fact that his statistics on the numbers are completely false. I mean, he really talks about a problem that just doesn't exist at the rate that he claims. And Kamala Harris has presented a very clear policy for immigration. But why do you think it is that Latino voters, I'm talking about, those who are living here and, very much part of American society, as well as because, as an immigrant, I can confirm that we can't vote unless we get citizenship, contrary to what Donald Trump tells you. But why do you think that in the Latino community, there is this draw towards Donald Trump?
there are a lot of misunderstandings of what Trump's policies actually mean. Because you'll notice whenever he says something really vile or he denigrates an entire category of human beings, he'll then kind of dial it back and be like, no, we just want to have people come here the right way. We have a process and you just follow the process. Yeah. And he's really the king of going over the line and then drawing it back so as to present a defensible, I didn't really mean it that way, kind of outcome for himself. But I think that also there are two factors at play here that we haven't talked enough about. The first factor at play is that folks from Latin America often have a very different political context than we do here. North Americans are constantly trying to map our politics onto South America and getting it completely wrong. And of course, in our hubris, assuming we understand South American politics when we don't. But what I would say is that there are a lot of people from Latin America who have personally experienced the rule of a strong man and who have not found that experience pleasant. That may be what brought them here. Remember what it says on the Statue of Liberty, asking the world to send its tempest tossed to us, holding ourselves out as a beacon of refuge for people who are not surviving in their current context. That's who we are. That's who we were in the world, right? We were a shining light of hope. We have people who may have experienced political oppression or persecution in their home country. When they come here, I think there's absolutely a feeling of pride if one has attained citizenship or legal status, and a feeling of having done it the right way and wanting others to do it the right way too. But I also think there's a second element of fear of surveillance, of fear of what a strong man can do to you if he attains power. I don't think enough journalists are asking the question of people about what they're being told when they are encouraged to vote for Trump. I have anecdotally heard stories of people being told that we'll know how you vote. We're going to know exactly how you vote. And if you vote the wrong way and Trump is in power, you better watch out. And so I think that we have to apply the context of fear onto our own. We've had this great luxury in North America of living largely without fear of violence from our government. I say we. I want to note here very clearly that Black and brown communities everywhere experience violence from the government in the form of policing and prosecution every day. But personal persecution because of a choice to vote is what I'm talking about, that people are actually afraid of. I think, first of all, there's that context. There's this idea that the strong man can watch you and get you if you don't get behind him. Then secondarily, there's also a failure to play out what Trump's policies actually mean. Timothy Snyder did a great, very short piece on this recently, where he talked about if you live in a world with mass deportation, governments don't get everything right? They're going to deport some people who are undocumented. They're going to accidentally deport some people who are totally documented. They're going to separate families, and they can create incentives also for people to snitch on each other and turn on each other, and for neighbors to turn in neighbors in a way that makes our communities unlivable. Additionally to that, it makes our economy unworkable because immigrants in this country perform labor. There was actually a really interesting recent, I think it might have come out just last week, numbers on when immigrants leave jobs that they have taken here in North America. United States citizens do not tend to step up and take those jobs. So the gap they leave in our workforce and in our economy would be absolutely crippling to this country.
It's the same issue in England when Brexit happened. There was a lot of European people coming in and doing the jobs that British people didn't want to do, and still don't want to do. Even after the separation of the nations. So it's what you're describing really is misinformation. I mean, people are not getting the information that would enable them to make an informed decision, and it's also been said that a lot of Hispanic immigrants, once they've successfully made a life for themselves in the US, they don't want any others coming in. And I've heard that. They're like, well, we're safe, but they become quite anti-immigration themselves. Have you heard that? Because it's something that is not really reported, but there is, as in all social groups and cultures, there's always an element of xenophobia or racism or segregation that builds up, no matter what your skin tone or the language that you speak of origin.
I think it's highly community dependent. I think there are communities where there's a stronghold of, immigrants from one country or another who form a fantastic community and want to invite other people to join that community, take part, and prosper.
Sure.
I think there are certainly people who hold the ideology you describe. I think one thing that's really frustrating to a lot of Latino friends that I talk to is the way we tend to paint all Latinos with the same brush. Yeah. It's like, well, Hispanic people feel this way, when in fact, Dominican people may feel very different than Colombian people, who may feel very different than Cubans. And I think that we have to remember that we're talking about a huge spectrum of lived experience, of national origin, of culture, of community, of immigration experience, of crisis back home. So it's almost as if imagine, Anthony, if we were talking about all European immigrants the same way, and we're saying that you are having the exact same experience as a Ukrainian.
Yeah. But that's the point, though, isn't it? There is always tribalism amongst groups. People will always find their tribe, and they will always have something to say about another tribe.
I mean, yes, but also, really, Cuban immigrants to this country have had a very different experience than Mexican immigrants, who have had a very different experience than Ecuadorians. So I think that, it is certainly, there's always tribalism, but there are also really concrete differences in how people perceive immigration and what people assume about why other people come to this country.
So what do any of these people think about being referred to as drug dealers and rapists, and the vile language of Donald Trump? Like, how do they qualify that, considering that he does lump everybody into one group? He is not specific. And now he's talking about they're coming from Africa, they're coming from Asia. And I mean, it's just pure racism. And yet it's still attractive to some people.
It is pure racism, and it's utterly untethered from reality. In order to believe Donald Trump's reality, you have to believe that there are millions of people from other countries who are crossing our borders illegally, pouring over our borders illegally, which is really actually hard to do, but they're doing it.
Yeah.
And they're taking our jobs in, restaurants and fields and construction. By the way, it's a huge issue. We have a housing crisis now. We'll have a much bigger housing crisis if our construction industry falls apart, because they lose the huge number of immigrants who are working in that sector.
Well, he wants to deport 20 million people. So
he wants to deport a huge chunk of our labor force. And so we have to imagine that all of these people are working these really important but not super highly paid jobs, and yet they're also selling guns and drugs on the side. And then they're also buying up all our houses so that nobody can have any houses anymore because immigrants bought them all. So they're both very wealthy and also working. It's just it makes no sense whatsoever. I think that people continually forget, and I'm going to emphasize it one more time, that even undocumented immigrants pay more into our system than they will ever get back, because they are paying taxes and every sales tax they're paying look it up. I encourage your viewers to Google it. They're paying vastly more into our government than they can ever receive, because they can't receive benefits because of their undocumented status. They're holding up our economy through their labor. I was listening to someone on NPR last week who was talking about, she was an economist from the University of Colorado, talking about how Donald Trump blames immigrants for our housing crisis and says that immigrants have bought up all the houses so you can't have one, which amazing. But she pointed out that the real problem actually is the construction issue, is that crackdowns on immigration prevent the construction of new houses. Now, do I think we should have an economy that is dependent on the labor of people fleeing violence who've had to enter our borders without documentation? No, I don't think that's a great move for our economy. But I also think that I cannot imagine how it feels to be someone who is putting so much into our country. Blood, sweat, and tears, hours of labor, struggling to raise a family here, and to be called an animal by Donald Trump and accused of criminality. One last thing, I'm a public defender. I work in public defense. I work with public defenders in 21 states now. I can tell you that the idea that there are 20 million murders and rapists from other countries wandering about our streets is completely false. And that by and large, when we talk about immigration in the context of criminality, we're often talking about the crime of illegal reentry itself, in which someone need not have committed any other bad act. They've committed a crime merely by being present in this country.
I would also just talk to that from a personal place as well. As an immigrant, we come to America to contribute. We come to America to seek a better life for ourselves and our families, but we come here because it is a special place, and often a better place than where we've come from. And therefore, there is this inbuilt desire to really make a go of it. And he never talks to that. He never talks about the fact that when you are making a journey, traveling however many miles, whether you're coming by foot or by plane, you want to contribute to this society that will eventually reward you. And that is the driving force for immigration. It's not just about stealing and taking from America. You get back what you put in.
We used to celebrate that. You know, I'm one of those far-flung Irish people who ended up here because of the potato famine. We won't talk about your history. And I think a lot about, you know, that diaspora. I think about the fact of my great-great-grandfather coming over here and being told, welcome, please build our railroad. And now we'd like you to fight in a war for us. And that's what his life consisted of, building a railroad and fighting in a war. And then he died here. And that was his great American experience. We used to honor stories of sacrifice, stories of promise in America. And now we denigrate them. And it's a shame on us.
Yeah, a nation of immigrants suddenly building a wall to prevent the movement of immigration. It's quite a remarkable feat that he's presented here. And the other thing is that Joe Biden's policies are actually not that dissimilar to Donald Trump's policies on immigration. I mean, he's not separating children from their parents or putting kids in cages, but so many of the Trump policies are still in place or have been put back in place, and numbers are down. But the biggest issue, as I understand it, is that there's not enough judges who are able to look at these asylum cases and process them fast enough. And that's why there is a huge backlog, because the investment in the judiciary there are large gaps in that funding too.
And you better believe that there are profit motives at play here as well. We've done wonderful work in the criminal legal system to try and reduce mass incarceration in America. We've been making huge strides. And incarceration is down, and we are no longer the world's most prolific jailer, which is a testament to the labor of people who have been working on this issue for decades. However, you know, what is growing really fast is the same private prison contractors who are working in our criminal court system building immigration detention centers.
Right.
And we have to think about who stands to benefit when there are not enough judges to process cases at the order, you know, the rate at which we need these cases to be processed. And so people are held for longer periods of time in detention. Absolutely, there's someone whose bonus is being made up of those people suffering.
I want to talk about the economy briefly before we kind of move into the abortion debate, which is very much going to feature in people's vote, I have no doubt. But the economy is tied to immigration, as we've been discussing in terms of labor force. But Donald Trump's plans for the economy here in the United States are just a joke. I mean, leading economists have said this is going to end up costing the country $7 trillion in additional spending. And because he wants to cut the corporation tax rate even further, there simply won't be the income and the deficit will grow. And before you know it, we'll be in a massive recession. And he's basically blaming other countries for wanting to export their goods to the United States and thinks that they will pay a tariff of up to 60%. I mean, he even said 1,000% at one point, referring to cars from China. I don't know. And just picking numbers out of the sky. And if that isn't scaring you, I don't know what is, because he has no understanding of international trade, let alone international relations and diplomacy. The guy is an imbecile on this particular subject. And yet people still buy into that he's a businessman, he knows what he's doing. From the economy perspective, we've talked about the kind of immigrants in the workforce, but there is also an issue of for society generally, like the cost of living could rise under Donald Trump. And again, people just don't recognize that yet.
People have to think about where their goods come from. If there are fewer houses being built, then the house price is higher. If there are fewer goods being, traveling about the world and coming in, and by the way, like who pays the tariffs? We here in the U.S., the importing business pays the tariffs. The price of goods in the U.S. becomes higher. Inflation rises. I think when we hear about people ignoring top economists who've weighed in on this topic, I think a lot about our mistrust of expertise and also the mistrust of a lot of people. And Trump has led a lot of people to mistrust the media. Obviously, you and I both have a perspective, and we are open about our perspective. Nobody's pulling anything sneaky on this show. But, you have large, credible news organizations who are trying to put forth information from credible experts like economists who are saying this is going to tank our economy, cost everybody a lot of money, and destroy the economic future of our children, let alone our ability to make ends meet. Yet it's very, very hard to get people to listen when they've been told by their political party that none of this media is trustworthy. Right. And that expertise is not trustworthy, and that once again we should turn away from anyone whose subject matter is this topic and listen instead to a quote unquote businessman who does not actually know anything about this area.
But this is very deliberate, isn't it? Like this is a strategy to, in the same way as trying to shut down the Department of Education. I mean, there's a kind of long-term strategy associated with this, which is keep expertise and education away from the people at large. Keep people uneducated and misinformed or ill-informed, and then that kind of helps the control. I mean, it sounds like a conspiracy, but it really isn't.
It really isn't. I mean, when you think about it, if you're Donald Trump and there's a lot of things you'd like to do that would really harm low-income and middle-class people and would really benefit people, at the very top. First of all, I got to say, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, it's got to bother you that you pay more taxes than Elon Musk. Like, that's just got to bug all of us. It bugs me that I'm paying more taxes than people who have more money than I could ever dream of seeing in my life. So that basic fairness question should bug us all. How does Trump get around the fact that any reasonable person would be bothered by that? Well, by preventing people from having that insight. And when we look at, for example, there's a ballot initiative in Kentucky right now that would shift a huge amount of funding over to school vouchers instead of going to public schools. There are counties in Kentucky that would essentially end up with no school option if that was the case. These vouchers are not enough money to send their children away to Andover. And this is actually the case with a lot of voucher programs, right? It's not enough money to actually pay for your kid to go to the school of your choice. And yet it strips your local public school of the funding they need to even be competent at providing a free and accessible public education to our children. Strategies like these are not accidents. It's not a big whoopsie on the part of the Republican Party. It's a desire to undermine our public schools, to undermine the accessibility of information. When you look in Project 2025, you should look at how much data they plan to erase or make non-transparent. They would like to essentially delete any data relating to race in the government because they really don't want people to know how much Black and brown families are disadvantaged by policies that they would like to put in place. So restricting information, restricting education, creating distrust in experts, distrust in media, it's all a way of intellectually isolating people until the only authority they can listen to is the party. What does that sound like? It sounds a lot like a cult.
It is interesting when at every rally Trump points to the camera and he goes, look at all the fake news over there. Look at him. The dichotomy in that is he needs those press there so that he can share that message that they are fake. I mean, that is, there's a word for that. I'm not even sure what it is. I don't think it's in my vocabulary. But it's it's like a double negative. But it's very sly. And, the enemy of the people and the denigration of the free press over almost a decade now. I mean, he's been doing it for decades, but we've certainly had it, in our psyche for the last 9 years now. It's had an effect. And a free press is very much part of a functioning democracy. Further proof that he doesn't want that.
That's the other thing is that data's ideologically neutral. It can be used for an ideological purpose.
Yeah.
But actual access to information, it's just information. And that's another thing. I feel like so many of these topics, when they come up, they pain me because, again, wherever you fall on the political spectrum, wherever you fall ideologically, you should want to know the impact of our current government policies, whoever's policies they are. You should want to know an accurate picture of what these ideas are doing in the world and how they're affecting ourselves and our families. And if you don't want to know that and you don't want anybody else to know that, you cannot claim to be wanting the best for our country. You have to acknowledge at that point that what you want is the execution of an agenda that might be hampered by data.
People are tired, though. People are exhausted. They're exhausted from working multiple jobs. They're not engaged with politics. They're not engaged with data or expertise or facts. And so for a lot of people we're hearing, it's just easier to let Donald Trump deal with everything. And it's very sad that is something that we're hearing more and more.
Yeah.
But I just want to point to the fact that a lot of the polling, because it does seem very strange to me that the polling is so close, considering that one is outrageous with their authoritarianism and their abusive use of language and their, and also their track record. They tried to overturn an election and stole classified documents and is an adjudicated rapist and, 34 felony counts. I mean, you would have thought that Kamala Harris would be way ahead. But it turns out that a lot of these polling companies have been created by Republican organizations, that they're actually setting up and have been for the last 4 years, setting up these new polling institutions, doing the polling that is Republican stacked. And so much polling is stacked. We assume that the methodology is done in an honest way, but it's a little bit like qualitative market research. If you've ever been to one of these things, they give you cookies, they give you a drink, and they kind of give you leading questions and they tell you what they want to hear and what their clients need to hear so that the marketeer can get paid. It's very interesting. But it's not an area that is above the line. It's a kind of below the line conversation. And so I'm very much of the opinion that the reason that these polls are so skewed is because they are simply controlled by Republican entities.
I mean, I don't know how you even poll people in this day and age. I have to say, I don't answer my phone. I know nobody in Pennsylvania answers their phone. Nobody in any swing state is going to answer their phone until well into November. I don't know how you extract this data in our information age. Nobody has a home phone. You can't call during dinner time and find somebody at home. I'm not sure that in door knocking people really answer I don't know plausibly how we find out what people really think. I will also say I agree with you. I have more than once tried to give people my peace of mind on a policy. When they have called me to poll me about it, it is not appreciated by them. I have a great time. But yeah, I don't understand how we move towards greater accuracy. I think that actually the lift of doing really high quality polling is much greater than a lot of media companies could probably afford to do at the rate at which consumers expect polls to come out. That's the other thing. We want to poll every week. We want to poll every day. We want to see the numbers changing in real time. And I think at this point, the investment required to do high quality polling is so high that we can't have both. We can't have high quality polls available at this rate of rapidity.
But the reason that they've created these polls, because the poll is not going to affect the vote necessarily. People will vote how they vote. And the poll is a good place for people to have a conversation, but I don't believe it really changes people's vote. But in my view, it's all because there is a plan to overturn the election again. There is another coup that is being readied. And to have the polling where it's neck and neck and this close is very helpful to those who are planning to overturn a legitimate election by saying, I mean, it's going to be very different to the coup of 2020, 2021. This one could be the electors or the legislatures refusing to certify because they're Trump loyalists. It could end up in the Supreme Court and we end up with a Bush v. Gore situation. And we know that the Supreme Court is stacked in Donald Trump's favor and in the favor of the far-right Christian nationalist movement, Project 2025, and, Leonard Leo and Kevin Roberts and all of these creatures. So how do you feel, because we're 16 days away from chaos, potentially? I mean, the chances of a clear winner without any contesting of the results is very unlikely in this situation, because with the stacked polling and with the rhetoric of Trump saying if I don't win, it must be rigged. He's been doing that ever since the last one.
And he's campaigning in California right now.
Yeah, he's in Coachella. But we are heading towards a constitutional crisis, potentially.
Oh, quite so. I mean, I say he's campaigning in California because I think his lack of anxiety about actually, obtaining votes in swing states is troubling. And yes, I think
we've got all the votes we need.
Yes, I think what we're talking about here is a really boring coup, because people don't pay attention to boring things, and it's like, what will this county clerk do? What will this state attorney general do?
Right.
What will this legislature do?
People like a riot.
We notice a riot. We do notice a good riot in this country. We don't necessarily notice, what bureaucracies are doing. I think there is a very real risk of that. I agree with you that the narrative right now, that it's neck and neck, does set the stage for the ability of Trump loyalists across the states to create problems for certification that could deny we, the people, our right to pick our president, and could put that choice instead in the hands of the Supreme Court or Congress, which, of course, the House would vote by delegation, not by membership. So it's Republican either way. And what we're seeing here is really a structure in America that allows minority rule to a staggering extent. Because, Donald Trump got a thumping in the last election.
Yeah.
We're lucky it was a thumping that took place in swing states. But in this country, things are set up so that somebody can get a thumping nationally and still be president if they are strategic enough in their machinations of bureaucracy. It's a huge problem. What I would say is this. If people are watching your show, obviously the people watching your show probably have a plan to vote, or they may have already voted. I get the sense that people who watch this are very engaged. But I would ask you to call your kids, call your grandkids. If you're a young person, call your friends. If young people turn out, we win. And I say we, meaning we on the side of people who would prefer not to have Donald Trump as president. Turnout is everything. There's only so much that can be done in terms of creepy, boring, bureaucratic coups in the face of massive turnout. Especially, and I say young people because the future belongs to them. The future belongs to them. What this country will look like in 50 years only matters to me in the context of old age homes and Medicare. But it matters to them in the context of what they'll be doing with their lives and what kind of country they want to live in. And I want them to hold power. I so want them to hold power. I want them to put the people they want into office. And I want to see the policies that they care about actually be discussed by our presidential candidates and by our elected officials. So what I'm begging is that if people talk to at least one person make them get a plan to vote. Make sure you're registered. Everybody's got to check their registration these days because voter rolls are being purged left and right. So we all have to play this game on hard level, check your registration. If we can just get young people to take the reins, I want to live in their world.
The turnout, I should remind us that the turnout was only 66% in the 2020 election.
It doesn't take that much. That's good.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's take another quick break, but I want to come back and talk about Kamala Harris as the alternative to the problem. That's next here on The Weekend Show. Lomi might just be the smartest appliance I own. It's like having an eco-friendly assistant that handles all my food waste. Lomi lets me turn my food scraps into dirt with a push of a button. It's a countertop electric composter that takes my waste and transforms it into nutrient-rich dirt in less than 4 hours. I run it while I sleep, just like my dishwasher. No more smelly bins, and it's so quiet, you barely notice it's running. Since I got my Lomi, I'm taking out way less garbage. I used to struggle with 3 full bags of trash every week. Now I'm down to just 1. What I love most is how much waste I'm keeping out of landfill. Less trash means less methane, and with Lomi, I'm turning that waste into nutrient-rich dirt that my plants absolutely love. If you're ready to start making a positive environmental impact and make cleanup a breeze. If you're ready to start making a positive environmental impact and make cleanup a breeze, Lomi is exactly what you need. Head over to lomi.com/weekend and use promo code WEEKEND to get $50 off your Lomi. That's $50 off when you go to lomi.com/weekend and use promo code WEEKEND at checkout. Say goodbye to food waste and hello to a cleaner, greener kitchen with Lomi. And with the holidays coming up, Lomi makes the perfect gift for someone on your shopping list. Welcome back to The Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis with Emily Galvin Almanza. I want to talk about the issue that I personally think is going to win the election for Kamala Harris, and that is women's health care, access to abortion, the right to choose, and maybe it's important that we rephrase the narrative as opposed to people who are pro-life and refer to them as anti-abortion, because, you know, marketing and the branding of this kind of pro-life movement, I think has been very problematic for the United States. And when polled nationally, Americans are pro-choice, but you wouldn't think that was the case if you listen to the lawmakers or consider the fact that Roe v. Wade was overturned by the MAGA Supreme Court. So Kamala Harris as a female is the right champion for this at the right time. And that's why I believe that she is the right candidate in this moment, because undoubtedly the overturning of Roe needs to be reversed. And that is, I think, the major issue going into this election. Do you think that's fair to say that you know that issue alone could be a huge driving force for turnout?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I wish men thought about this a little bit more. I don't want to go to certain states. I am a married woman. I take precautions. If I were to have an unexpected pregnancy, especially one with an emergency, like an ectopic pregnancy, I don't want to be left to die in a Texan parking lot. If I run a company that works all across the country. If I ask young people to take jobs in states where they do not have the ability to access care, I don't want them to be arrested trying to cross state lines to receive care. I don't want the government monitoring my period. I wish men could think about, imagine a world in which the government was monitoring your body, and if a particular medical thing happened to your body, you no longer get to decide the course of your care. And you might have to die. I'm so sorry. You might just have to die because that's the law. I mean, so yes, it's not just a motivating issue. For many people, it is a life or death issue. And I mean that on both sides, because there are people on the other side who perceive this as a life or death issue for their cause. However, I think there are more people who are concerned with women's ability to survive and prosper in our country and to live as full citizens. Because make no mistake, if the government can tell you that under some medical circumstances you might just have to die, you are not a full citizen.
Kamala Harris has made some very eloquent statements about this. And that is why I firmly believe that she's the right person at the right time. The right, unfortunately, is saying because she's not had biological children, she doesn't have a voice on this, which is a remarkable argument. It's not even one I really want to waste any time on. But that is the level of discourse coming from that side regarding this issue. Remarkable, really.
I'd be fine with it if men didn't have to say it. I'm kidding. They haven't actually born children. I might note they haven't carried another living human being.
There is that. There is that.
Yeah.
I just want to talk about something that happened in Florida. Florida's health department, it was announced on Friday, can't block a TV advertisement in support of a ballot measure that would protect abortion rights. This is a federal judge ruled this. After the department sent letters to local TV stations commanding them to stop airing the ad or risk criminal consequences. They said the government cannot excuse its indirect censorship of political speech simply by declaring the disfavored speech is false. So this is effectively, they're saying that this is like a First Amendment issue, which is kind of interesting, that the airing of an abortion commercial is a First Amendment issue. I mean, it's political speech.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, is this not thematic, right? Like what we've been talking about this entire time is the right saying, if I don't agree with it, it must not be true. Yeah. Or if you tell me something that I don't want to be true, it's probably not true. And I am not going to look up any information so I don't have to encounter the not truth of it. It's appalling to me that the government would even try to ban. I mean, first, it's just like from a legal perspective, you cannot ban political speech you don't agree with. You just can't.
The problem with that, conversely, is that if Donald Trump had spewed the kind of lies and abuse that he does in America, in the UK, for example, he wouldn't be running for office. He wouldn't be allowed to run for office. I mean, the fact that he even tried to overturn an election would prevent him from running for office. And there are many, many countries that have a kind of civilized, balanced view of what is political speech and what is hate speech and what are outright lies. And we've only started calling them lies in the last 2 years. Prior to that, everyone was referring to falsehoods, which was like,
misleading
what is that, right?
Yeah.
So, I've often referred to the US recently as a lawless nation just by nature of the fact that Donald Trump is allowed to run for president, considering what he has done to the system, the political system, and proven that these supposed protections that are built in that everybody thinks are going to save us from authoritarianism are there, and they just aren't. It's a fantasy to think that there are protections in place. So again, this is free speech is almost, or free speech as Elon Musk would refer to it, as a free speech absolutist. That is almost ushering in, if Donald Trump wins, an era of authoritarianism, courtesy of the First Amendment.
Here's what I will say about this. There is no such thing as the law in the real world. The law is not a tangible thing that you can hold in your hand or use physically. It is a shared belief system that exists only as it manifests through humans, specifically judges and juries, mostly judges at this point, who get to interpret the law. A law, people often think of the law as a thing written on a piece of paper, black words on white paper, right? And that's the law. But that's not actually what the law is. The law is the original words on the paper interpreted through tens or hundreds or even thousands of judicial opinions, each one of which slightly changes the meaning of the way we use this law. So where we are as a country vis-a-vis how the First Amendment is applied, how the Second Amendment is applied, where we are as a country with guns, where we are as a country that originally had a really cool Fourth Amendment, and then it got just like watered down, where we are as a country where the Eighth Amendment does not apparently protect us against forms of execution that are experimental, untested, and seem to be causing people agonizing, lengthy pain.
And where the 25th Amendment is not up for discussion.
So this is a function of our people. It's a function of who gets to interpret the law right now. It's not even the people who have interpreted because we've now abandoned our commitment to precedent. I mean, used to be, just to have a lawyer nerd moment, judges felt very strongly about not undoing only under very, very limited circumstances would they fully abandon the prior interpretation of a particular law. But with the culture set by our current Supreme Court, they no longer feel particularly bound. by the way people previously interpreted the law. So what we are in is a moment where, yes, we have laws written down, but they only exist as they are interpreted right now by our bench, which has a lot of people on the bench who are very driven by a political agenda. This could happen in other countries too. I think there are a lot of structural problems with America. We can talk about the Electoral College. We can talk about the size of the Supreme Court, talk about a lot of things, but any country has to remember that the law isn't real, that what's real is the people and who holds the power to interpret it.
You're also describing democracy, Emily. It's also not real. It's also requires everybody to join in. It requires people to believe in it. It's intangible. It's not written down. It's something that if you suddenly have someone like Trump show up and decide that it doesn't matter, and not just Trump, but there's a whole swathe of MAGA Republicans who claim that we're not a democracy and we never were a democracy. That is also something that it requires a collective responsibility to actually make it work.
Democracy is a use it or lose it thing. I don't remember which wonderful Peter Pan movie it was where Tinkerbell almost dies and everybody has to clap for her to bring her back to life because applause is apparently what revives fairies. But like, that's where we're at here, right? Like we've all got to clap or Tinkerbell dies. We've all got to vote or we don't necessarily get to keep that ability. So you're absolutely right. I think this is a fun episode of The Weekend Show in which Emily and Anthony go really deep and get philosophical. But it is a call to action for anybody who sat out a prior election. I mean, this really goes back to what I was saying before about like, now's the time to pause the show and go call your friends and make sure everybody's registered and voting because it is use it or lose it.
So finally, we've talked a lot about Donald Trump. Unfortunately, I mean, I'm done with him. You know, I'd be very happy not to talk about that guy ever again. But tell me and tell people why, in your mind, Kamala Harris deserves their vote.
I think that she deserves our vote for a few reasons. First of all, I was deeply moved by Joe Biden's humility and courage and patriotism in stepping aside at the moment he did. I cannot imagine that was an easy thing for him to do after such an accomplished career. I've been really grumpy for a while about our gerontocracy. You could ask anyone around me. I've been ranting for a long time about when the next generation will get their moment. I do think that, I agree with Kamala Harris on a lot of things. I disagree with her on some other things. But she represents a person who is a new generation of leader. She represents an ability to listen. People talk about her changing positions. And again, I don't agree with the direction in which she's always gone when she changes her position. I like that she can change her position. I like that she can have her mind changed. I like that she seems to know what she doesn't know and want to learn more about things. I like the idea of taxing people who have the wealth to be taxed and driving that funding towards solutions that I think will lift us all up, like greater housing access, greater access to meaningful employment, a more stable economy for people my age and younger. The ability to raise kids without the huge cost burden that makes, talking to conservative friends about abortion, we all come to the same place where we do agree that investing in families and investing in the ability to afford a family is a policy that benefits everyone. And these are the kinds of policies that she represents. I also think that, from a perspective of someone, I watched Claudia Sheinbaum. This is my least intellectual take. I watched President Sheinbaum's inauguration in Mexico, and I cried. Sitting there, and they're fanning her with smoke, and I'm weeping, and I felt that way because it's just so appalling to me that in this country we have never given a woman the opportunity to lead. I think that this is something that I want for us. I want a woman with her experience. I want a woman with her mixture of cultures and background, not the prosecutorial background. Again, could just leave that behind, but her experience in the American story, I think, is shared by a lot of people who have never been represented at that level of government. So there's a lot of reasons why I am excited to vote for her.
I'm pleased to hear it. And her story is so different to Donald Trump's story, with being born with a gold spoon or a silver toilet, or, pick your favorite. But either way, it's like it's so clear to me that people born into great wealth do not make great political leaders. And really to have empathy, which is actually the one thing, I guess, through his physiology that he is unable to do, to have great empathy is really the key to doing the right thing as an organizer, as a leader. And I agree with you. I have great hope for her and for her presidency. Okay, we have to finish, but for now, Emily Galvin Almanza, thank you for joining the Weekend Show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. You can see more from me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast. And I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.